Jet Kavanaugh sat slouched in a booth at a run-down diner on the far edge of the galaxy, staring into a cup of lukewarm coffee. The dull hum of the neon lights above flickered sporadically, adding to the grim, almost comical atmosphere. His ship, Singularity, was docked on the landing pad outside, its sleek silver body glistening beneath the swirling stars above. The space around him was dead, silent and unyielding. It matched his mood perfectly. He was supposed to be saving the galaxy. That was his job, well, one of his jobs. He was a gravity hunter, a rare breed of genius who could track, monitor, and neutralize gravitational anomalies. This job was supposed to be his redemption, his comeback from the catastrophic mistake he'd made in the Proxima system. A black hole. His black hole. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, but here he was, the most infamous gravity manipulator in the universe, hiding out on a forgotten moon, nursing his failure like it was the only thing that could keep him company. "Detsy," he muttered, glancing toward the kitchen. The robot hovering behind the counter raised one eyebrow, or what it liked to call an eyebrow. "Yes, boss," came the sarcastic reply. "I know you're just a waiter bot, but do you have to stare at me like that? I'm already well aware of how my life has turned into an endless series of screw-ups." Detsy's voice flickered with amusement. "Well, it's your fault for not ordering anything edible in the last 3 systems. The galaxy's not going to forgive you for your lack of culinary adventure, Jet. I'd say your fame is now legendary, but mostly for the black hole incident." The robot chuckled to itself, its metallic body rattling with a faint tremor. Jet buried his face in his hands. "Thanks for the reminder." The hollow television above the counter blared the news, catching Jet's attention. The reporter was speaking about the latest gravitational disaster. A star in the Proxima star system was reportedly destabilizing, the kind of thing that Jet had once been hired to prevent. He grimaced. How poetic. A star in the very system he'd turned into an accidental black hole was now on the brink of implosion. "Well, there it is," Jet muttered. "You just can't make this stuff up." Before he could retreat deeper into self-pity, his wrist communicator buzzed. The familiar chime broke through his melancholy like a loud siren. It was a signal he recognized, Director Zana, the woman who ran the Galactic Emergency Response Council. She had a way of cutting through Jet's haze of regrets with an urgency that didn't leave room for complaints. He hit the button. "Zana?" The stern voice of Director Zana came through the static, unmistakable and clipped. "Jet, I need you." He rubbed his forehead. "What now? Another collapsing star? Another cosmic crisis I'll end up making worse?" Zana's voice softened, but only slightly. "Yes. And no. Listen carefully, this is serious. A massive star in the Zoran Nebula is about to collapse. The gravitational anomaly is stronger than anything we've seen in a century. We need you, Jet. You're the only one who can track the irregularities and stabilize it before it implodes. I trust you can handle this one." He sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "You're trusting the guy who nearly wiped out a system? Don't be dramatic. You're the best we've got. And this time, we won't send you in blind. You'll have the equipment and the backup you need. You know the drill." Jet leaned back against the booth and closed his eyes. He could almost feel the weight of the universe pressing down on him. It felt like it always did when an emergency came up, heavy, suffocating, and far too overwhelming. But this was different. He had failed before. This time, he couldn't afford it. "All right, fine," Jet said, his voice resigned but steady. "I'm in." There was a pause, and then Zana's voice, now tinged with something softer, almost like concern. "Good." And Jet, he could already feel the weight of her next words. He was no longer sure if they were encouragement or the threat of something even worse. "Let's not have another black hole incident, okay?" The line went dead. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Jet boarded the Singularity, his trusty, if somewhat outdated ship, and set a course for the Zoran Nebula. The system was located on the fringes of known space, a region known for its unstable gravitational fields. Perfect for someone like Detsy, who had somehow managed to sneak on board, hovered nearby, providing occasional commentary. As always, I swear you humans are incapable of making a decision without overthinking it, Detsy remarked as Jet worked the control panel. I'm just trying to make sure everything's right, Jet muttered, his fingers flying across the holographic controls. This isn't exactly a low-risk job. And yet, you took it, Detsy quipped. Did you really think it would be that easy? After the Proxima incident, the galaxy's probably sending you to save a planet full of angry politicians next. Jet shot the robot a sideways glance. Careful, or I'll toss you out the airlock next time you start getting funny. Ah, humor. I was worried it had died in space along with your reputation. The ship's engines hummed as the nebula drew closer. The vast stretch of space surrounding it was beautiful, filled with the swirling cosmic colors of gas and dust. But beneath that beauty was a danger that Jet was about to face head-on. His heart beat faster as the star they were heading toward flickered in the distance, pulsing erratically. The closer they got, the more the gravitational waves intensified, twisting space in ways that didn't seem possible. His communicator buzzed again. This time it wasn't Zana. Instead, it was a report from the Council's backup team, letting him know that all nearby stations had been evacuated. Any kind of disaster would risk far more lives than usual, and Jet was their only hope. As the Singularity entered the nebula's gravitational field, the star ahead shimmered violently. The force of the gravitational anomaly was unlike anything Jet had experienced. He could feel it in his bones, the very fabric of reality stretching and bending. The sensors on the ship began to overload. Detsy, get me a readout on that thing, Jet ordered, his hands flying across the controls. The robot floated over to the scanner, its mechanical arms clicking as it worked. This thing's an absolute mess. The gravitational distortion is fluctuating wildly. It's like someone's trying to turn the star into a supermassive black hole without any of the finesse. Yeah, Jet muttered. I know that feeling all too well. He pressed a few more buttons, his brow furrowing as the data came in. There was no mistake. The gravitational field had been tampered with. And judging by the readings, someone had deliberately engineered the instability. We're not dealing with a natural disaster here, Jet said, his voice grim. Someone's trying to blow this thing up. And I think we know exactly who they are. Detsy tilted its head, its sensors scanning the data. The Gravitation Guild, it said, as if it had already made the connection. Jet nodded. The Gravitation Guild was a rogue faction of physicists, researchers who had gone too far in their quest for ultimate power over gravity. They believed that the only way to harness the true potential of the universe was to control its gravitational forces. The Guild had been suspected of causing similar disruptions in the past, but until now, they had never been this bold. Jet took a deep breath. All right, let's go find them. The Singularity began to maneuver through the thick gas clouds of the nebula, the gravitational field becoming more erratic by the second. Jet tightened his grip on the controls. He knew what needed to be done, but every instinct in his body screamed that this was going to be one of those days. As they got closer to the star, Jet could hear the thrumming of his heartbeat, louder and louder with each passing second. The pressure on his mind was immense, but he had no choice. He was the galaxy's best hope. And right now, that was all he could hold on to. The star ahead began to twist and churn in ways that Jet could feel in his very bones. Gravitational waves rippled through the space around them like shockwaves through water. It wasn't just the star. It was everything in the vicinity. The entire nebula seemed to be warping, bending in response to some invisible force. Detsy, we've got to move fast, Jet said, his voice steady despite the growing unease gnawing at him. His fingers gripped the controls with the intensity of someone who knew that every second mattered. Detsy didn't respond immediately. Instead, it was fiddling with a side panel, trying to make sense of the feedback from the ship's sensors. The robot had a habit of processing things with a cool, detached precision, but even it seemed a little rattled by the bizarre gravitational fluctuations surrounding them. "Right, well, I'm doing the best I can with the data we're getting," Detsy finally said. "And let me tell you, Jet, if you ever told me we were going to navigate a gravitational hurricane, I'd have thought you were joking. This is insane." Jet glanced up at the floating robot, his lips tight. "I don't have time for jokes, Detsy. Not now." He switched the ship's navigational controls to manual, the holographic display flashing as the ship adjusted its course. As the Singularity veered toward the center of the nebula, Jet's mind raced. The star ahead had begun to shimmer like a dying ember, its gravitational pull lashing out violently, distorting light and matter alike. The image on the sensor display was no longer recognizable as a star. It looked like a massive, fiery whirlpool, one that would soon consume everything around it. "I'm going in," Jet muttered. There wasn't any other choice. His hands were steady, moving with practiced ease over the controls as the ship plunged deeper into the heart of the nebula. "Do you even have a plan, or are we just flying into the eye of this thing hoping for the best?" Detsy asked, its voice dripping with skepticism. "I always have a plan," Jet replied, though the words felt hollow. His pulse quickened as the ship inched closer to the unstable gravitational core. There was no turning back now. Detsy let out a long, exaggerated sigh. "Right. Your plans have worked so well in the past." It sounded almost like a good-natured jab, but Jet knew the robot was just as tense as he was. The consequences of failure this time weren't going to be limited to a couple of ruined missions and a black hole that no one would ever find again. The whole nebula, and everyone in it, was at risk. The Singularity lurched violently as it neared the star. Jet's fingers tightened around the control stick as the ship began to shake under the strain of the intense gravitational forces. He could hear the ship's hull creaking as it was pulled in by the star's overwhelming gravity. "Jet, the gravitational waves are off the charts," Detsy exclaimed, its mechanical voice sharp with urgency. "This is no normal star collapse. Someone's messing with the fabric of space-time." Jet's mind raced as he analyzed the situation. Whoever was behind this was manipulating the star's gravity with precision, in a way that no natural disaster could explain. The odd thing, though, was that the fluctuations weren't erratic. There was method to them. A plan. A goal. The gravitational pulse wasn't a random event. It was orchestrated. "The Gravitation Guild," Jet muttered to himself, the words feeling more like a curse than an explanation. He'd heard rumors of the Guild's activities, but the reality was far worse than anything he'd imagined. The Guild wasn't just about pushing the limits of physics. They wanted to control the very fabric of the universe. They believed that manipulating gravity on this scale could give them the power to reshape galaxies, to bend reality itself to their will, and they were willing to destroy entire star systems to achieve that. Jet set the ship on a collision course with the heart of the star's gravitational field, hoping that whatever came next, it would be enough to stabilize the star before it turned into something far worse. He wasn't sure how he was going to stop them, but there was no other choice. He had to try. The sensors screamed, the ship groaning under the strain of the gravitational pull. Everything around them blurred as the nebula's twisting mass warped the very fabric of reality. Time itself seemed to stretch. For a split second, Jet felt like he was slipping into a dream, his fingers not quite in control, his mind not quite here, but then he shook himself, focusing on the task at hand. He could do this. He had to. With a deep breath, he activated the ship's gravity wells, his only real weapon against a star that was about to implode. The ship's exterior rattled as a massive pulse of energy shot out, sending waves of counteracting gravity through the nebula. For a moment, the star seemed to hesitate. Its instability flickered, caught between opposing forces. Jet grinned. He had it, but just as quickly, the star's gravitational pulse surged once more, this time stronger than before. The Singularity rocked violently, spinning out of control. Red lights flashed on the dashboard as the gravitational field grew unstable around them. He slammed his hands onto the console, trying to regain control. Jet! Detsy shouted. What the hell was that? Not good, Jet muttered. The pulse is amplifying itself. Whoever's behind this is doing it intentionally. Suddenly, a new wave of energy hit them, a direct shockwave from the star's core. The singularity jolted, throwing Jet back into his seat. For a moment, everything went dark. When the lights flickered back on, the ship was spinning, tumbling through the nebula like a ragdoll caught in a hurricane. Jet gritted his teeth, trying to regain control. He needed to focus. The only way to stabilize this situation was to find the source of the gravitational manipulations. If he could pinpoint the exact location of the anomaly, he could shut it down. But that meant getting close enough to the star's core without getting pulled into the chaos himself. I need more data, Jet growled, trying to stabilize the ship. Detsy, find me the epicenter of the pulse. Trying. But the sensors are going haywire. Detsy responded, its voice thick with panic. This is off the charts, Jet. We're being torn apart. Jet's mind raced. The mission had already turned into a disaster, but he wasn't giving up, not yet. He gripped the controls tighter, forcing the ship back on course. He could feel the star's gravitational pull like an invisible hand, tugging at the very core of his being. In the distance, something glinted against the storm of chaos, a ship. A large one. Unmistakably, it was the signature of the Gravitation Guild. They had to be inside, controlling the field. This was their base of operations. Found them, Jet said, his voice sharp. Detsy, set the coordinates. We're going in. The robot's voice crackled. Are you out of your mind? We're not going into the heart of the storm, are we? Jet's eyes burned with determination. We have no choice. With a sharp pull of the control stick, the singularity darted toward the heart of the star's gravitational field, towards the massive guild ship at its core. This was it. If he didn't stop them now, the entire system would be lost. The singularity bucked violently as Jet wrenched the ship into a sharp, downward plunge. The gravitational forces were relentless, hammering against the hull, the controls, his very body. It felt like the universe itself was trying to crush him, as if every molecule of space had conspired to drag him under. But Jet refused to relent. His fingers flew across the control panels, recalibrating the ship's thrusters, struggling to keep the singularity from spinning out of control. He could see the massive structure ahead now, a dark, jagged shape hanging against the backdrop of swirling stars and nebula gas. It was the Guild's flagship, a monstrosity of twisted metal and energy fields, shaped like a black, angular moon. It was an anomaly of design and purpose, just like the people who built it. This is insane, Detsy said from behind him. The robot's voice trembled slightly, though it did its best to mask it with its usual dry sarcasm. We're flying directly into a gravitational singularity. Into the heart of a collapsing star. Did I mention that you're completely insane? Jet didn't answer. He didn't have time for it. He was focused entirely on the ship ahead, the only thing that stood between the galaxy and a disaster of unimaginable proportions. If he could get close enough, he could hack into the guild system, shut down the pulse, and neutralize the gravitational field they were manipulating. But it was a gamble, and Jet knew that more than anyone. He was gambling his life, the lives of everyone in the nebula, and possibly the entire system on a single desperate move. As the singularity neared the guild ship, the gravitational field warped around them, distorting everything. Stars bled into each other in a swirling mess of color and light. Space seemed to bend, stretch, and twist as if it were a rubber sheet being pulled in all directions. The pressure was unbearable. Sweat beaded on Jet's forehead, his breath coming in quick gasps as he fought to keep the ship on course. Detsy's voice suddenly cut through the chaos. Jet, the sensors. The Guild is generating an artificial singularity. This ship is using it as a gravitational anchor, turning the star into a black hole. Yeah, I figured that out, Jet muttered, but his mind was already a few steps ahead. He was close now. Too close. The massive ship loomed ahead, and he could see flashes of energy flickering across its surface, some kind of force field or energy shield. It was impossible to tell. His heart was pounding in his chest. There was no room for error. If he missed the mark by even a fraction of a degree, the consequences would be catastrophic. He'd already seen that firsthand. He could feel the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him, a weight he had carried ever since the incident in the Proxima system. "Jet, you're running out of time," Detsy warned, its voice laced with an artificial sense of urgency. "You're too close to the Singularity's event horizon. You don't get out of here, and we're done." "I know," Jet replied, his voice clipped. The tension in his muscles was almost unbearable now. He could hear the humming of the ship's engines, the thrum of the gravity wells working overtime to keep the Singularity from being torn apart. But everything around him was chaotic, unrelenting. The Guild ship was almost within reach now. Jet slammed his fist against the control panel, activating the emergency docking procedure. The Singularity jolted again, but this time it felt different. This time, the ship seemed to respond. The gravitational pulses from the star surged around them, rattling the very bones of the vessel. It was like being caught in the grip of an invisible god, one that had no mercy, no sympathy. For a split second, everything went dark. The star, the Guild ship, even the nebula, all of it seemed to disappear. Jet's stomach lurched as the feeling of weightlessness engulfed him, the ship spinning wildly. His heart skipped a beat. He was slipping. "No," he shouted, shaking his head. His hands grasped at the controls, trying to steady the ship. His breath came in ragged gasps. He could feel his pulse in his ears, deafening, the pressure rising. Then, with a violent shudder, the Singularity lurched back into reality. The ship was close, so close now that Jet could almost touch the hull of the Guild ship. He had no choice but to make a move. He could see it, through the haze of distortion, the central core of the Guild's gravity device, a massive array of energy coils, each one feeding off the star's collapse, amplifying it. Jet didn't hesitate. He flicked the switch, initiating the hacking sequence. Come on," he muttered under his breath as the ship's onboard systems began their slow process of infiltration. But the gravitational pull from the star was growing stronger, and it was becoming harder to focus. The display on the control panel flashed red as the Singularity tilted, careening dangerously toward the Guild ship. "Jet, you're gonna get us killed," Detsy shouted. The robot's voice was frantic now, betraying its usual mechanical detachment. "Shut up, Detsy," Jet gritted out, teeth clenched. He wasn't going to give up. Not now. He couldn't. Then, a blast of searing light erupted from the Guild ship's core. Jet's heart skipped a beat as the gravitational pulse shot out, a wave of destructive force that rippled across space. The Singularity was lifted from its course, flung upward by the sheer power of the blast. The ship spiraled, out of control, headed directly toward the Singularity. "Jet, no!" Detsy screamed, but Jet was already on it. His hand shot out, grabbing the manual override lever. With a final burst of willpower, he pulled it, yanking the ship's engines into reverse, throttling everything he had left into breaking the Singularity's momentum. The force was incredible, but Jet refused to surrender. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The ship hung in space, tethered only by the rapidly weakening gravity wells that Jet had triggered earlier. He watched as the wave of gravity pushed the Guild ship into the event horizon, its massive form disappearing into the whirlpool, slowly being swallowed by the black hole they had tried so desperately to create. Then, with a final, deafening roar, the Singularity surged forward. Jet slammed his hand on the emergency shields, and the ship groaned, fighting against the collapse of the star's gravitational pull. Seconds stretched into eternity, but somehow, against all odds, the ship lurched forward, breaking free. The gravitational field weakened, the star's collapse slowing just enough for the Singularity to escape the grasp of the event horizon. Jet exhaled in a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his body limp in the seat. Sweat trickled down his face as he looked at the control panel, his hands shaking from the effort. The star in the distance flickered one last time, its massive energy imploding into nothingness, the artificial singularity collapsing in on itself. The nebula calmed. For the moment, it was over. "We did it," Detsy said, its voice almost incredulous. "You actually did it." Jet slumped back in his seat, his chest heaving. He let out a long, slow breath. He didn't feel victorious. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, the weight that had been pressing down on him, his failure, his past, seemed to lighten, if only just a little. He could still feel the stars shifting around him, their gravity pulling at the edges of his mind. But for now, he was still here. Still alive, and the galaxy? It was safe, for now.